The land was dry, cracked like broken pottery beneath the blazing sun. Rivers that once ran with silver streams now lay silent, reduced to thin lines of dust. Trees stood as skeletons against the sky, their leaves long devoured by desperate hands. Hunger clung to the villages like a shadow, and whispers of despair filled the air. In the heart of this suffering kingdom lived a man named Kyle. He was not a warrior, nor a noble. He was a herdsman, though now even that title felt hollow. Once he had guided a proud flock of goats across the hills, their bells echoing like music in the dawn. Now only one goat remained, thin and fragile, its bones pressing against its skin. Kyle's hut was simple: mud walls, a roof patched with grass, and a small fire pit that rarely held enough fuel to burn through the night. Hunger had already claimed his wife and his young son in the last season of sickness. The emptiness in his home was heavier than the silence of famine, yet despite the weight of loss, Kyle's heart did not harden. When children of the village cried from hunger, he shared what little milk his goat could give. When old men collapsed in the dust, he helped them rise. His hands were calloused, his clothes worn, but his eyes carried a quiet dignity that no storm could strip away. Still, the people around him questioned his ways. "Kyle," an elder said one morning, his voice sharp with anger, "you are a fool. You give when you have nothing. You help others while your own life falls apart. Do you think kindness will fill your belly?" Another neighbor spat into the dust. "The world is cruel, herdsman. Only the selfish survive. If you keep wasting what little you have, even your last goat will be gone, and then who will pity you?" Kyle lowered his head in respect, but his words carried calm strength. "A man without compassion is already starving in his soul," he said softly. "If we forget each other in these times, then we are already lost." His neighbors shook their heads and walked away, muttering that his heart was too soft for a world of drought and death. Yet Kyle carried on, tending to his last goat, whispering to it as though it were family. But in the nights, when the stars burned cold above the dry earth, Kyle's spirit trembled with dreams he could not explain. In one dream, he stood before a great fire, its flames leaping into the sky, brighter than the sun. From the fire rose a crown of gold, glowing as though forged from the very light of the heavens. Kyle reached for it, but the fire roared, and the crown vanished into smoke. He woke with sweat on his brow, his heart pounding in fear and wonder. He dismissed it as a trick of hunger, a vision born from an empty stomach. What king could ever rise from the dust of a poor herdsman's hut? Still the dream clung to him, as stubborn as the drought. He told no one, fearing they would laugh, or worse, believe madness had taken him. Each day, Kyle carried his grief like a silent burden. He missed his wife's laughter, the way she had sung while grinding grain. He missed the small hands of his son tugging at his robe. Now, only the bleating of his last goat filled the silence. That animal was more than food. It was memory, heritage, and hope bound in fragile flesh. But storms were gathering, not of rain, but of fate. Though Kyle could not see it, the currents of his life were shifting. His choice, his heart, his sacrifice would soon be tested in ways that would shake the kingdom itself. For destiny, though often silent, watches closely. And sometimes it begins with the life of the humblest man, standing alone in the dust with nothing but compassion in his heart. And so Kyle, the poor herdsman, carried on with his one goat, unaware that the path of kings was quietly unfolding before him. The drought had tested his endurance. The whispers of neighbors had tested his resolve. But the true trial, the one that would demand his very last hope, was only a heartbeat away. The sun was sinking low, painting the sky in shades of copper and blood. Dust swirled in the wind, carrying with it the dry coughs of a land too weary to breathe. Kyle sat outside his hut, his thin hands stroking the rough fur of his last goat. The animal bleated weakly, its ribs pressing against its hide, a reflection of its master's hunger. Kyle's stomach knotted with emptiness, but his mind wandered to the dream again. The fire, the crown, the voice he could not hear yet felt deep in his bones. He shook it away, standing to gather sticks for a fire that would do little more than keep the night's cold at bay. It was then he saw him, a figure stumbling along the dirt path, cloaked and bent, as though carrying the weight of the entire desert on his shoulders. Each step seemed a battle, and his breaths rattled like dry leaves. His face was shadowed beneath his hood, but his hands trembled as they reached for balance against the air. Kyle's first thought was that the man would collapse before reaching him, and he nearly did. The stranger staggered, then fell to his knees in the dust just before Kyle's hut. "Please," the man whispered, his voice cracked and dry as the earth. Food, even a scrap. Kyle's heart clenched. He had so little. Only the goat remained, and with it, the faint promise of survival. To kill it meant to cut away the last rope that tied him to life. Without the goat, hunger would surely claim him in the days to come. He stood frozen, torn between the sharp call of survival and the quiet pull of compassion. The voices of his neighbors echoed in his mind, mocking him, warning him, telling him that kindness was foolishness. "Do not waste what you have left," they had said. "When your goat dies, you will die with it. Keep it close. Do not give." Kyle looked at the stranger again. His body was thin, his lips cracked, his eyes hollow. He was not a thief or a soldier, not a noble or a merchant. He was simply a man, broken by the same famine that weighed upon them all. The herdsman's chest rose and fell with a deep, trembling breath. His mind screamed at him to protect the goat, but his heart whispered a different truth. What was survival without compassion? What was life if lived in selfishness and fear? The decision tore at him like a blade. Tears stung his eyes as he led the goat to the side of the hut. His hands shook as he prepared it, whispering a prayer with each movement. "Forgive me," Kale said to the animal. "You were my last, my companion, but may your life give life once more." The goat bleated softly, as if in answer, before silence filled the air. Kyle built the fire higher than usual that night. The smoke curled into the fading sky, and the scent of roasting meat spread through the barren fields. The stranger sat silently, watching, his eyes following every motion of Kyle's hands. When the food was ready, Kyle placed the first portion before the man. "Eat," he said gently. "Your strength must return." The stranger lowered his head in thanks and began to eat, slowly at first, then hungrily, as though he had not tasted food in weeks. Kale sat opposite him, his own hunger gnawing fiercely, yet he took only a small portion, leaving most for the stranger. Neither spoke much, but the silence was not empty. It was heavy, filled with something unseen. The stranger's eyes lingered on Kyle with an intensity that felt both unsettling and comforting, as though he were studying not the herdsman's face, but his very soul. When the meal was done, the stranger leaned back, his hood slipping slightly to reveal weathered skin and eyes that seemed far older than his body. "You have given what you could not spare," he said at last, his voice low but steady. "Such kindness is rare in a dying world." Kyle bowed his head. "I gave because you needed it more than I. That is all." But inside, his heart ached. His hands still felt the weight of the goat, his last tie to family, gone forever. He had chosen compassion, but at what cost? As the fire crackled, Kyle thought he saw something strange in the man's gaze. A glimmer, like light hidden beneath shadow. It flickered only for a moment, but it left a chill running through him. The night deepened, and the wind carried with it the sound of distant whispers. The stranger closed his eyes, resting by the fire, while Kyle sat awake, staring into the flames. His sacrifice was complete, but the weight of it pressed on him like a stone. He did not yet know that this night, this act of giving, had set into motion a chain of events far greater than himself. And so, Kale slept with an empty heart and an emptier home. The stranger lay silent by his fire, but the air around him carried a strange power. By morning, Kyle would wake to find more than hunger waiting for him. He would find the first whisper of destiny. The morning came quietly, with a pale sun rising over the barren hills. A faint wind stirred the dust, whispering through the cracks of Kyle's hut. He stirred awake, his body weak, his stomach hollow. For a moment he wondered if the events of the night had been only a dream. But then he turned toward the fire pit. The place where the stranger had slept was empty. No footprints in the dust, no sound of departure, only the ashes of the fire, still warm. Kyle's breath caught in his throat. The man had vanished without a trace, as if the earth itself had swallowed him whole. He sat in silence, staring at the empty spot. Questions pressed at his mind. Who was he? Where did he go? Why here, to my hut? But the answers did not come. Only hunger did. Kale's eyes moved to the small pen beside his hut. It was empty. His last goat, his last hope, was gone. What remained was only silence and the faint echo of bleating that would never return. For the first time in years, Kyle felt truly alone. His family was gone. His herd was gone. Now even his last companion had been taken by his own hand. As he stepped outside, the voices of the village reached him. Men and women stood in small groups, whispering and shaking their heads. When Kyle passed, they did not hide their scorn. "There goes the fool," one woman muttered. "He fed his last goat to a stranger." "Madness," another spat. "What kind of man throws away his only chance to live?" An elder leaned on his stick, glaring at Kyle. "Kindness will not save you, herdsman. Your soft heart has doomed you. Soon, hunger will finish what foolishness began." Their laughter cut deeper than the hunger in his belly. Yet Kale did not answer. He walked with his head lowered, his dignity intact, though inside he felt the ache of their words. By evening, the sky turned silver with moonlight. Kale lay on the floor of his hut, his body weak, his spirit torn between sorrow and peace. Though he had nothing left, a strange calm rested in his chest. He thought of the stranger's hollow eyes and the way he had eaten as though life itself had returned to him. Perhaps this was enough, Kyle told himself. Perhaps it was better to give life, even at the cost of his own. As he drifted into uneasy sleep, the wind outside shifted. It no longer howled with emptiness. It carried whispers, low, unearthly voices, rising and falling like a song he could almost understand. The moon poured light through the cracks of the roof, brighter than he had ever seen. Kale stirred, his dreams pulling him into a vision. He saw a vast gate of gold, taller than mountains, glowing in the darkness. Its doors stood open, and beyond them lay a land of green fields and flowing rivers, a place untouched by famine. From within came a voice, not loud, not clear, but steady and deep, like water echoing in a cavern. From sacrifice comes life. Kyle reached toward the gates, but as his fingers brushed the light, the vision dissolved. He awoke with a gasp, the moon still bright above him, the wind still carrying its strange whispers. He sat upright, heart pounding. Sweat beaded his brow. His body was weak with hunger, yet his spirit felt stirred by something greater than himself. But when he stepped outside to seek answers, there was nothing. No footprints of the stranger, no sign of passage, only dust and silence, as if no one had ever come. Kale wrapped his arms around himself and looked up at the glowing moon. For the first time, he wondered if his sacrifice had not been the end of his life. but the beginning of something he could not yet understand. The night pressed on, heavy with mystery. Hunger gnawed at his body, but faith, faint and fragile, rose in his soul. And so Kyle entered the deepest trial of his life, emptied of all possessions, mocked by his neighbors, yet holding a dignity the famine could not steal. Beyond the horizon, another battle was raging, the struggle for a kingdom in turmoil. Soon, Kyle's path of sacrifice would collide with the fate of a nation. Far from Kyle's desolate hut, beyond the barren plains, the royal city of Zalhara groaned under the same famine that gnawed at the herdsman's bones. Once a jewel of stone and gold, it now lay cloaked in dust. Markets that had bustled with grain and spice now displayed only empty baskets. Wells had grown shallow, fountains dry. Hunger does not respect walls, and the cries of the poor rose even within sight of the palace gates. Mothers wailed for milk to feed their children. Men fought like wolves over crusts of bread. Even the guards who patrolled the marble avenues walked with hollow eyes, their armor rattling loosely against bodies thinned by want. Inside the palace, the king sat on his throne of ivory. His robes hung heavy, but his heart hung heavier still. King Darius was once a man of power and dignity, yet famine had aged him. His beard was streaked with gray, his eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. Around him, his council argued like vultures circling carrion. "We must ration the grain," one minister cried. "Storehouses still have reserves. Give a handful to the people, just enough to keep them from revolt." Another slammed his fist against the table. "Fools! If we open the granaries, they will be emptied in days. Then what? Starvation will return, and we will have lost even our last defense." A third leaned forward, his voice sharp as a knife. "The people grow restless. Already there are whispers of rebellion. They say the gods have abandoned the throne. They say another ruler is destined to rise." The king's hand trembled on the arm of his throne. "Another ruler?" His voice cracked with both fear and anger. "Who dares whisper such treason?" The chamber fell silent. Each man looked to the other, but none dared answer. The words had been heard in the streets, in the taverns, even in the temple courtyards. Rumors spread like wildfire, that a man of the people, a humble soul of great sacrifice, would rise from the dust to claim the crown. The high priest stepped forward, his robes white, but his face solemn. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing low, "the prophecy is older than your reign. It speaks of a famine that would bring the kingdom to its knees, and of a chosen one who would give all he had to a stranger. That sacrifice would mark him as the true king, chosen not by men, but by the heavens themselves." Murmurs filled the hall. Ministers shifted uneasily. The king's fingers clenched tight around his scepter. "Lies," he roared, though his voice trembled. "Old wives' tales, spoken to stir rebellion. Who among us has seen such a man? Who among us has witnessed such a sacrifice?" Yet even as he denied it, a seed of fear took root. For famine makes men desperate, and desperate men will cling to prophecy like drowning sailors to driftwood. Beyond the palace, rebellion smoldered. In taverns, the poor whispered the prophecy by candlelight. In the markets, beggars raised their voices, calling for the chosen one. Some claimed to have seen him in visions. Others swore he walked among them in rags, unrecognized. The air thickened with unrest, and soldiers struggled to keep the city from collapsing into chaos. At night, King Darius could not sleep. He paced his chamber, listening to the wind claw against the windows. Shadows seemed to mock him, whispering of betrayal, of the people's waning faith. The prophecy haunted him. A herdsman who gave his last goat to a stranger shall rise as king. Could such a man truly exist? The king's thoughts turned darker. If such a man were found, the people would rally behind him. The throne would be torn from his grasp. His line would end, and his crown would rest on the head of a beggar. The council gathered once more, their voices bitter with fear. "We must find this man," one said, "and destroy him before the people crown him," another whispered. The king closed his eyes, the weight of decision pressing down like iron. Bloodshed seemed inevitable, yet the more he tried to tighten his grip, the more the prophecy slipped through his fingers. Outside, the famine deepened. Graves multiplied. Fires burned in the distance, where desperate mobs stormed storehouses. The kingdom teetered on the edge of collapse, and far away, in his lonely hut, Kyle sat by the dying embers of his fire, unaware that the choice he had made in the darkness, feeding a stranger his last goat, had shaken the foundations of a kingdom. While Kale struggled with hunger and faint hope, the kingdom itself convulsed with fear, rebellion, and prophecy. Soon, the paths of the humble herdsman and the trembling throne would collide. And when they did, sacrifice would meet destiny. The famine deepened. Days stretched into weeks, and still Kale endured. His body thinned until his ribs pressed sharply against his skin, yet he carried himself with quiet dignity. Each morning he rose with the pale sun, gathering firewood, searching the barren soil for roots, surviving on what little water remained in the wells. Hunger clawed at him, but his spirit did not break. The villagers, once mocking, grew uneasy in his presence. "This man should have died by now," they whispered among themselves. "He has nothing left, no goats, no grain, no kin, yet he walks as though the famine cannot claim him." Others remembered the stranger. Rumors spread like wildfire, feeding upon the prophecy whispered in every corner of the kingdom. Some said the stranger had been no man at all but a messenger of the gods, sent to test Kyle's heart. Others claimed they had seen light spilling from Kyle's hut on the night of the sacrifice, a glow like fire, but without smoke. And still, Kale said nothing. He lived quietly, tending to his hut, offering what little strength he had to those weaker than himself. When a child cried of thirst, Kale gave him the last of his water. When an elder stumbled from hunger, Kale carried him home, though his own legs nearly gave way. The people began to see him differently. No longer a fool, no longer a madman, but something else, something set apart. One evening, as the red sun bled into the horizon, a caravan arrived in the village. Soldiers in battered armor dismounted from weary horses. Behind them came a figure robed in white and gold, the high priest of Zalhara himself. Gasps rippled through the villagers. Never had such a man stepped into their poor settlement. The priest's eyes swept the huts, the dust, the gaunt faces, until they found Kale. "You," he said, his voice carrying both weight and wonder. "Come forward." Kale rose slowly, confused. He bowed his head, unsure of why such men had come. The priest lifted a staff carved with ancient runes. "We seek the one of sacrifice, the one spoken of in the prophecy. Tell me, herdsman, what became of your last goat?" The villagers fell to their knees, awe breaking through the weight of famine. Some wept openly, others pressed their foreheads to the dust. For the first time in years, hope stirred like rain in dry soil. But Kyle stepped back, shaking his head. "No," he said softly, "I am no king. I am a poor herdsman, nothing more. I have no crown, no riches, no strength to rule." The priest's eyes burned with conviction. It is not crowns or riches that make a king. It is sacrifice. It is the heart that gives when there is nothing left to give. Kyle's knees weakened, not from hunger this time, but from the weight of destiny pressing upon him. Could this truly be the path set before him? The soldiers surrounded him, not with hostility but with reverence. "You must come with us," the captain said. "The kingdom teeters on the edge of ruin. The people are rising. They will not follow the old king much longer. They wait for you." Kale's heart pounded. The thought of leaving his village, of stepping into the halls of power, filled him with dread. Yet the memory of the stranger's hollow eyes returned to him, the calm he had felt that night, the vision of the golden gates, the voice that had whispered, "From sacrifice comes life." Perhaps it had all been leading to this. He turned to the villagers, their faces filled with hope he had never seen before, and in their eyes, Cale saw the truth. The famine had not destroyed them because hope had survived in his single act of mercy. With trembling hands, he nodded. "If it is truly the will of the heavens," he said, his voice breaking, "then I will go." The priest struck the ground with his staff, his voice ringing out like thunder. "Behold, the chosen one has been revealed. The herdsman who gave his last goat shall rise as king." The villagers erupted in cries of joy, their voices lifting like a storm. Tears ran down Cale's face as the soldiers led him toward the waiting horses. The barren field stretched around him, yet in his heart seeds of hope began to grow. Far away, in his palace of stone and fear, King Darius awoke in the night with a shiver. Though no messenger had yet reached him, he felt it. The tremor of destiny moving against him, the tide of prophecy swelling like an unstoppable wave. The herdsman's sacrifice had been seen. His destiny had been revealed. And soon the kingdom itself would rise or fall upon the strength of his heart. Cale's hidden act had become a beacon for the suffering, and the prophecy had given it voice. But destiny is never embraced without resistance. In the palace, the old king prepared for war against fate itself. A hush settled over the crowd. The soldiers shifted uneasily. The priest's face paled, his lips moving in a silent prayer. "It is as the prophecy foretold," he whispered. "A man who gave his last goat to a stranger, with no thought for himself, shall rise as king." The village fell silent. All eyes turned to Cale. His chest tightened, but he spoke with honesty. "A stranger came to me, weary and starving. I gave him food, though it was all I had. He left before dawn, and I have not seen him since." The palace of Zalhara loomed like a wounded beast, its walls cracked from neglect, its courtyards silent from famine. Inside, the royal chambers smelled of bitter herbs and death. King Darius lay upon silken cushions, his once mighty frame now withered to bone and skin. His crown slipped low on his brow, and his breath rattled like dry leaves in the wind. Yet his eyes still burned with pride, and pride does not die easily. When the high priest entered to deliver his message, the chamber fell silent. Every noble leaned forward, desperate, fearful. "My king," the priest said, his voice steady. "The prophecy stirs. The man of sacrifice has been revealed." Gasps broke through the court. The nobles exchanged anxious glances, their jeweled fingers twitching. Darius's face tightened. "Who dares claim the throne of Darius?" His voice, though cracked, still carried command. The priest bowed. "Not a prince, not a noble. A herdsman, Cale, who gave his last goat to a starving stranger." The king's hand clenched the sheets, veins rising like cords. "A goat? A fool's kindness? This is what the gods would place above me?" His breath grew harsh. "No, no! The throne is mine. The crown will not pass to a beggar in rags." One of the nobles, Lord Malik, sharp-eyed and ambitious, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, the people whisper of this Cale already. They say the gods favor him. They say he carries the light of mercy in his hands. If we do nothing, their hope will grow, and your throne will weaken." The king struck the bed frame with trembling fury. "Then crush him. Let him be dragged before me in chains, his mercy ground into the dust. If the people look to him, show them his bones." But the priest raised his staff, his face pale. "Majesty, beware. To strike against prophecy is to strike against the heavens themselves." The king's eyes flared. Then let the heavens break before I yield my crown." The soldiers who had escorted Kale returned to the capital with their quiet, bewildered prisoner. Word of his arrival spread faster than flame on dry grass. By the time they reached the city gates, crowds had gathered. Thin, starving people, their eyes shining with desperate hope. "That is him," they whispered, "the herdsman, the one who gave everything." Children ran alongside the caravan, cheering though their bellies were empty. Women pressed forward with hands outstretched, as though Kyle could bless them simply by passing. The guards struggled to keep order, but the people's hunger was not only for food, it was for hope, and Kyle had become its living face. Kyle, still in his ragged clothes, bowed his head in shame. He did not feel like a savior. He felt the weight of their eyes pressing him down. What if I fail them? What if the king is right, that I am only a beggar with nothing to give? But among the shouting, Kale saw a boy no older than 10. His lips were cracked, his frame frail, yet his eyes held something Kyle recognized. "Faith," the boy whispered, too soft for the crowd to hear. "Don't be afraid. The gods are with you." Kale's chest tightened. Perhaps destiny was not about crowns at all. Perhaps it was about moments like this, when the powerless looked to the humble for strength. Inside the palace, nobles argued like jackals over a carcass. Some urged the king to crush Kyle quickly, before the people rose. Others, more cautious, warned that to slay a man favored by prophecy would invite the gods' wrath. But Darius would not hear reason. In his chambers he summoned his captains. "Gather your loyal men," he rasped. "When this herdsman enters the court, spill his blood before all. Let the people see how powerless their so-called savior truly is." Yet outside the walls, another storm was brewing. The people gathered in thousands. They crowded the streets, filling the air with chants, "Kyle! Kale! The true king!" The city shook with their voices. The starving had found new strength, not from food, but from faith. Farmers laid down their tools, mothers clutched their children, even guards lowered their spears. Kale stood among them, terrified, yet moved. He tried to quiet the crowd, lifting his hands. "I am no king," he cried. "I am only a man. I have nothing to give you but my heart." But the people shouted louder, "Then that is enough!" At that moment, thunder rolled across the skies, though no storm clouds gathered. The earth trembled beneath their feet. A wind rose, carrying whispers that seemed to come from the heavens themselves. "From dust and sacrifice shall rise a ruler with a heart unbroken." The crowd fell silent, awestruck. Even Kale staggered beneath the weight of the words. He could not deny it now. The prophecy had come alive in their midst. Within the palace, the king's fury deepened. He swore he would see Kale's blood spilled before another sun rose. But outside, the people's voices rose like a tidal wave. For the first time in generations, the starving kingdom had chosen hope over fear. And in the heart of the uprising, Kale stood trembling, caught between the wrath of a dying king and the love of a desperate people. The throne room of Zalhara was thick with tension. Torches flickered against walls carved with the faces of kings long dead. At the far end, King Darius lay on his throne, his body crumbling, his crown tilting low, yet his will clung fiercely to life. Before him stood Kale, ragged, barefoot, and trembling. His shoulders were bent not from chains, but from the crushing weight of expectation. Behind him, the people pressed at the palace gates, their chants echoing faintly through stone walls. "Kyle! Kale! The true king!" The king's lips curled. "You, a herdsman, dare stand before me? If the gods have chosen you, then prove it. Let us see if your heart is as pure as the whispers claim." The nobles leaned forward eagerly. Many had schemed for the throne themselves, and the thought of a shepherd rising above them filled their hearts with venom. They longed to see him fall. Lord Malak stepped forward, carrying a chest bound in iron. With a theatrical flourish, he threw open the lid. Inside gleamed gold coins, jeweled necklaces, and plates of silver. The light shimmered across the chamber like the sun on water. "Kyle," Malak sneered, "take this, all of it. Leave the palace and vanish back into the dust where you belong. Be rich beyond your dreams. None will call you fool again." Kale's eyes lingered on the treasure. He thought of the empty hut he once called home, of nights spent cold and hungry. He thought of the graves of his family, who had perished for lack of food and medicine. With such wealth he could have saved them. His heart ached, his hands trembled. But then he remembered the boy in the crowd, the cracked lips whispering, "Don't be afraid. The gods are with you." Kale closed the chest with slow, steady hands. "Gold cannot feed the soul," he said softly, "and I will not buy my life at the cost of my people's hope." Gasps rippled through the hall. The noble scowled. The king's eyes narrowed. Another noble barked an order. Guards entered, dragging two peasants in chains, a man and a woman, gaunt and frightened. They were thrown to the floor before Kale. "Command us," the noble said coldly. "Order their punishment. Strike them down as criminals, and you will prove you have the will to rule. Show mercy, and we will know you are too weak for the crown." Kyle's chest tightened. The peasants lifted their hollow eyes to him, trembling. They had done nothing but starve like all the others. He clenched his fists. The hall waited in silence. Kale turned to the guards. His voice wavered at first, then grew firm. "Release them. If a king's power means crushing the powerless, then I want no part of it. A ruler's strength should shield, not destroy." The peasants wept as their chains were struck off. Whispers filled the room, sharp and angry. Nobles shifted in unease, but Kyle stood taller now, his spirit steadier than before. The high priest stepped forward, carrying a single loaf of bread on a tray. The scent of baked grain filled the chamber. Kyle's stomach knotted with hunger. He had not eaten properly in days. "This," said the priest, "is your portion. Eat and find strength for the throne. Without food, you cannot rule. But know this, outside these walls waits a starving child. If you give it away, you may not have the strength to survive what comes next." The bread trembled in Kyle's hands. His throat burned. Every instinct screamed at him to eat, to silence the gnawing emptiness inside. Then he saw again, in his mind, the eyes of that boy in the crowd, the boy who had placed his faith in him. Kale turned, walked to the door, and pressed the bread into the hands of a guard. "Give it to the child," he whispered. "If I cannot rule on an empty stomach, then I do not deserve to rule at all." The guard hesitated, awestruck, then bowed and left. The hall was silent. Even the torches seemed to burn more brightly, as though heaven itself leaned closer to witness. The king's face twisted in rage and fear. He struggled to rise, his voice breaking. "No, this is trickery! He is no king. He is a beggar dressed in virtue." But as he spoke, a great wind swept through the throne room, though no doors had opened. The torches flared high, shadows fled, and at the center of the hall stood the stranger, cloaked, radiant, no longer weary, but shining with unearthly light. Gasps rang out. The nobles fell back in terror. The stranger's voice filled the chamber, deep and resonant. "This man has given when he had nothing. He has chosen mercy over power, sacrifice over life itself. He is the one the prophecy foretold. The herdsman shall be king." Kyle dropped to his knees, trembling, tears streaming down his face. He had not sought this crown, yet destiny had found him. The people outside roared as the gates burst open, their voices flooding the hall like thunder. Hope had triumphed over fear, and the dying king, his fury spent, slumped against his throne, his crown slipping as darkness claimed him. Kale had passed the trial. The noble's schemes lay broken, the prophecy fulfilled. But the true weight of kingship was only beginning. For now, the crown of Zulhara must rest upon the brow of a shepherd, and the fate of a starving kingdom would rest upon his heart. The throne room was a storm of voices. Nobles shouted, some in outrage, others in fear. The people outside roared like the sea, their chants crashing against the palace walls. Kyle! Kale! The true king! At the center of it all stood the herdsman, barefoot and trembling, his face streaked with tears. He did not feel like a king. He felt like the same poor man who had once clutched a rope around his last goat, wondering if tomorrow would bring food or death. Yet the stranger's glowing presence still lingered in the air, a reminder that the moment was real, undeniable. The prophecy had been spoken. The heavens had chosen. King Darius, gaunt and trembling, tried once more to rise. His crown slipped sideways, his scepter clattered to the floor. Rage burned in his failing eyes. "He shall not take my throne," he rasped. "I am king by blood, by lineage, by right. No shepherd will replace me." But his strength faltered. His knees buckled, and with a final gasp, he collapsed onto the marble floor. Silence swept the chamber. The last breath of the old king was gone, his crown rolling from his brow and ringing hollow as it struck the ground. The nobles stared at the fallen crown, each tempted to seize it, but none dared touch it. It seemed to burn with unseen fire, as though waiting for only one head. With a thunderous crack, the palace gates gave way. The people surged inside, not with swords and spears, but with voices raised in unshakable unity. They poured into the throne hall, their hollow faces lit with hope. When they saw Kale standing there, frail but unbroken, they fell to their knees as one. "Rise, shepherd," they cried. "Rise, our king." Kyle shook his head, overwhelmed. "I am no king," he whispered. "I am only a man who gave what little he had." But the high priest stepped forward, lifting the fallen crown. His voice echoed with solemn power. "That is what makes you worthy. Kings born of greed bring ruin, but a king born of sacrifice brings life." He placed the crown upon Kyle's head. The hall erupted with cries of joy. The torches flared as though the heavens themselves rejoiced. The nobles, though some still snarled with envy, found their knees buckling beneath them, compelled by prophecy's weight. Kale stood crowned, but he did not stand proud. His shoulders bowed under the crown's weight, not as a trophy, but as a burden. Tears ran freely down his cheeks. In his mind, he saw the faces of his family, lost to famine. He saw the last goat he had slaughtered for a stranger, the final tie to his old life. He felt the gnaw of hunger that had almost broken him, the loneliness of nights in his empty hut. And now, this, a kingdom kneeling, a crown upon his head. He whispered to himself, almost too softly to hear, "I will not forget." The people held their breath as Kyle lifted his hand. His voice was quiet, yet it carried through the hall like thunder. "Open the granaries," he said. "Let no child starve while I wear this crown. Let the food of the palace be the food of the people." The guards bowed and rushed to obey. For the first time in months, the people tasted bread that very night. Tears mixed with laughter in the streets as bowls were filled and hunger eased. Kyle walked among them, refusing the gilded robes offered to him. He wore his simple tunic still, and when the children ran to him, he knelt among them as he always had. Mothers wept and called him father. Men clasped his hands and called him brother. And in that moment, Kale understood what kingship truly was. Not thrones, not crowns, not jewels, but the willingness to give even when nothing remained. From the dust of famine had risen a shepherd with a crown. The kingdom of Zalhara, once broken by greed and hunger, found hope again in the heart of a man who had chosen mercy over survival. And as the sun rose over the city, casting golden light upon its weary streets, the people whispered a new name for their ruler,